Hey everybody, my name is Jason, and this is a quick intro to Blawx version 1.5, which was just released today, so let's take a look. Here you can see we've got the new blocks. The main change in version 1.5 has to do with how we deal with defaults and exceptions, and our example project for defaults and exceptions is the Bird Act. So we're going to take a look at the new Bird Act. And the legislative text here has changed. We are now saying that penguins are birds, birds fly. Despite 2, penguins do not fly, subject to 4. Penguins on planes can fly. And despite 3, cartoon penguins with jetpacks can fly, except for Pingu. I don't know if you guys remember Pingu, but Pingu is a favorite of mine. So, how do we encode this act in the new version of Blawx? First, we've got penguins are birds. So we're going to start out and say we know that penguin is a category, we know that bird is a category, and we're going to use this, which is the big feature of version 1.5. It's called the attributed rule block, and it gives you not just the conditions and the conclusion, but it also allows you to attribute that conclusion to usually the current section, but you can actually use whatever section you want in here. But it attributes the conclusion to that section, and it allows you to say whether that conclusion is subject to exceptions or subject to applicability. Oh, look at that. I spelled subject wrong. Bug report. Okay, so we say first, when we know A is in the category penguin, we also know that according to the new Bird Act section 1, A is in the category bird. And so you can see we have encoded penguins are birds. So how do we encode birds fly? We say we know that thing is a category. The category thing has the attribute flies. And we know when we know an object is in the category bird, then we know that according to section 2, it can fly. Now this is subject to exceptions and it's subject to applicability. And we'll come back to that part later. But basically that just means it's possible for another section of our rules to override this conclusion that something can fly. So then we get to part 3. And part 3 says, despite section 2, penguins do not fly, subject to section 4. So how do we say that in Blawx? Well, here's what we do. So this says despite section 2, and this says subject to section 4. And you can say, we know that the conclusion in section 3, that it is false that something can fly, overrules the conclusion in section 2 that something can fly. And in the reverse, we know that the conclusion in section 4, that something can fly, overrules the conclusion in this section that it cannot. So that is how we encode despite, and that is how we encode subject to, and we still have the ability to put that information wherever it actually appears in your law. So exceptions to the rule in 3 don't have to be placed in 3, they can be placed wherever the law puts them. And then we say we know that the category penguin has an attribute called on plane. And when we know something is in a penguin, we also know that subject to section 3, it can't fly. Or according to section 3, it can't fly. And that this rule is subject to exceptions. And then we go into section 4. Penguins on planes can fly. When we know something is a penguin and it's on a plane, we know that according to this section, it can fly, subject to exceptions and applicability. And then we get to section 5. Despite 3, cartoon penguins with jetpacks can fly, except for Pingu. Because Pingu is an exception, we've made a separate category here for that. But in section 5, we need to say despite 3, cartoon penguins with jetpacks can fly. So first we need to say cartoon jetpack is a thing that a penguin can have. And then we say this rule overrides the rule in section 3. And then we say when we know something is a penguin with a cartoon jetpack, we also know that according to this section, it can fly, subject to exceptions and applicability. And then our last section is except for Pingu. And here we have used a new feature of Blawx version 1.5, which is applicability. So instead of saying that Pingu can't fly even when Pingu has a jetpack, which is not what this section says, right? This section doesn't say that Pingu cannot fly. It just says that you cannot presume by virtue of section 5 that it overrides section 3 in the case of Pingu. It just makes section 5 not apply to Pingu. So that kind of exception we can now say by using this applies block. And we say Pingu is a penguin. The conclusion in this section that it is false that this section applies to Pingu holds. And so we have attributed this fact, instead of attributing the conclusion of a rule, we have attributed a fact to this section NBA 5 Pingu using this holds block. And the fact that we have given is that section 5 does not apply to Pingu. So that's how our encoding works. Now let's look and see what the explanations look like. So the first question we're going to ask is it true that Pingu is a bird? And if we run this, we get an answer back that yes, Pingu is a bird, and we know that Pingu is a bird because section 1 holds, because according to section 1, he is a bird because he is a penguin. And you will notice nowhere in here is the explanation checking to see whether that conclusion in section 1 was defeated, because we didn't make section 1 subject to exceptions. And nowhere in here is it checking to see whether or not section 1 applies to Pingu, because we didn't make section 1 subject to applicability. So it's just a straightforward, Pingu is a penguin, therefore, according to section 1, he's a bird, and that holds. Therefore, Pingu is a bird. So that's our first one. Let's take a look at our next test. Is it true that Pingu can't fly? And here we're going to ask, is there no evidence that Pingu can fly? And we're going to run. And the answer that we should get is that there is no evidence Pingu can fly, because despite the fact he is a bird and birds can fly, he's a penguin and penguins can't. So we're going to say there is no evidence that Pingu can fly, because there is no evidence that the conclusion in section 2 that Pingu can fly holds, because despite the fact according to section 2 Pingu can fly, because Pingu is a bird, because section 1 says that Pingu is a bird because Pingu is a penguin. Despite all of that, the conclusion in section 2 that Pingu can fly is defeated, because the conclusion in section 3 that is not the case Pingu can fly holds, because according to section 3, he can't fly because he's a penguin. So here you can see the defeasibility system is working, and you've got the links to the different sections of code, and you have a full explanation for all of the factors that were considered in whether or not Pingu can fly. So that one works too. Let's go look at the next one. Pingu on a plane can fly. If we know Pingu is on a plane, is it true that Pingu can fly? And the answer here is demonstrating Blawx 1.5's ability to defeat defeaters. So here we see the conclusion in section 2 holds, and the section 2 says that Pingu can fly because Pingu is a bird, and Pingu is a bird because Pingu is a penguin. And there is no evidence that this conclusion is defeated, because section 3 doesn't defeat it, because according to section 3, Pingu can't fly because he's a penguin, but that conclusion is defeated by the conclusion in section 4, because in section 4, he can fly if he's on a plane, and he is on a plane. So we have exceptions to rules that can be accepted by other exceptions to those exceptions. And then, last but not least, we demonstrate that if we say that Pingu is a cartoon with a jetpack, we can demonstrate that there is no evidence that Pingu can fly because the exception no longer applies to Pingu. And we can dig down and see there is no evidence. The conclusion is defeated. Section 3 holds because it is not defeated because of Section 5. There's no evidence of Section 5, and we're running out of space here, but if we zoom out, we can see there's no evidence that Section 5 applies to Pingu because it is not the case that Section 5 applies to Pingu because Section 5.Pingu says that Section 5 does not apply. So we have the reasoning system connected to the text of the legislation. We have the ability to do exceptions and defaults, including exceptions that defeat other exceptions, and we now have the ability to say that certain rules don't apply to particular people, which is a thing that shows up a lot in legislation when you read things like Part 2 doesn't apply to ministers of the Crown or something like that. So that is the latest version of Blawx, version 1.5.0-alpha. Still lots of bugs to fix, and at least one major feature that we want to add still, but we're making great progress. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I'm Jason at lexpedite.ca. Thanks.